My name is Eleanor. I'm 53 years old. I've been a wife, a mother, and for a long time, a woman who believed in loyalty above all. But sometimes, loyalty blinds you more than love ever could. I never imagined that one day I'd look at the man I married and feel like a stranger was standing in front of me. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. Little things that didn't add up, moments that left me wondering if I was losing my mind. Was I imagining the distance between us, or was it real? There were evenings when he'd come home later than usual, and I'd catch only a glimpse of tiredness in his eyes before he retreated into silence. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was something else, something I couldn't name. We'd sit together in the living room, the TV playing softly in the background, but it felt like we were miles apart. I'd try to bridge the gap with small talk, but his answers were brief, almost automatic, like a man who'd rehearsed a script he didn't want to share. I kept asking myself what had changed. Was it me? Had I done something wrong? Or was it him? But whenever I looked at his face searching for answers, all I saw was a quiet, unsettling sadness. Or maybe guilt. And yet he never talked about it. It was as if he was holding a secret, locked away behind a wall he didn't want me to cross. I remember one night, lying awake long after he'd gone to bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a weight pressing on my chest. It was the kind of weight that seeps into your bones, heavy and relentless. I wanted to reach out to him, to ask him what was wrong, but the words got stuck in my throat. How do you ask the person you love if they are slipping away? How do you admit that you're scared? Scared of losing the life you built together? I tried to keep my feelings hidden, to hold on to the hope that this was just a rough patch. After all, every marriage has its ups and downs, doesn't it? But deep down, a quiet voice whispered doubts I couldn't ignore. What if this distance wasn't temporary? What if the man I loved was changing into someone I didn't recognize? One evening, I caught myself watching him more closely, noticing the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, how his hands trembled just a little when he thought I wasn't looking. I noticed how he seemed distracted, as if 1,000 thoughts were running through his mind, none of them about me. And in those moments, I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. Something was wrong, and I wasn't sure if it was something I could fix. I didn't want to accuse him or confront him. Not yet. I wanted to understand, to find a way back to the man I married. But more than anything, I wanted to protect myself, to keep my heart safe from the pain I feared was coming. So, I kept my questions silent, locking them away where they couldn't hurt me. At least not yet. The phone, that little device that used to be just a tool for connection, became a source of tension I couldn't ignore. It started with the way he guarded it, like it held a secret he was desperate to keep. I noticed how it buzzed quietly on the kitchen counter late at night, and instead of answering, he'd silence it or let it ring endlessly until it stopped. At first I told myself it was just work, maybe something urgent, something he couldn't talk about. But the truth was harder to face. There was a shift in how he treated the phone, like it was a lifeline to someone else. I caught glimpses of him slipping away, eyes flickering to the screen with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. I remember one evening when I was washing dishes and his phone lit up with a message. He glanced at it quickly, his face tightening for a second, then slipped it into his pocket. My heart clenched in that moment. A strange, unfamiliar ache. I wanted to ask to know who was sending those messages, but the words felt like poison on my tongue. The secrecy grew heavier with each passing day. Calls would come in when I wasn't around, and he'd rush away to answer them, voice low and guarded. I felt shut out, like I was watching a private play unfold behind closed doors, one where I wasn't meant to have a part. The silence between us deepened, filled with questions I was too afraid to voice. Late at night, I'd lie awake, imagining all the possibilities, the worst fears that clawed at my mind. Was there someone else? Was this distance more than just a rough patch? I wanted to believe in us, to trust the years we'd built together, but the evidence was mounting quietly, like shadows creeping across the walls. I tried to keep calm, to convince myself I was overthinking, but every secret glance at the phone, every hushed conversation chipped away at my confidence. I felt lost in a maze of doubt and suspicion, torn between hope and despair. One afternoon, he left his phone unattended for a moment. I didn't mean to, but I glanced at the screen. Just a glimpse. Messages filled with laughter and inside jokes, words I wasn't supposed to see. My breath caught. The reality I'd been avoiding crashed down like a storm. It wasn't just about the phone anymore. It was about the truth hiding behind it. The distance, the secrets, the silence. They all pointed to something I feared but hadn't dared to name. And in that moment, I realized that the life I thought we shared was slipping through my fingers, replaced by a reality I wasn't ready to face. But still, I stayed quiet. Still, I kept watching, waiting, hoping for a chance to understand before everything shattered completely. That morning, I woke up with a soft smile, thinking about the day ahead. It was our anniversary. Not just any anniversary, but the one that marked 15 years of marriage. 15 years of laughter, tears, quiet nights, and shared dreams. I pictured the look on his face when he'd realize I remembered, how we'd exchange those knowing glances that only couples with years behind them share. I had planned something simple but meaningful. Breakfast in bed, a little note tucked beside the coffee cup, a promise of dinner at the place where we first met. I imagined the warmth of the day, the stories we'd reminisce, the gentle comfort of being together. But the day slipped by quietly. Too quietly. No breakfast tray, no whispered happy anniversary. When I finally mentioned it that evening, hoping for even a small acknowledgement, his eyes flickered, surprised, confused, like I was speaking a foreign language. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "I forgot. Work's been crazy." That moment stung more than I expected. Not because he forgot, people forget things all the time, but because it felt like a symbol of everything unraveling between us. 15 years, reduced to a forgotten date and a hurried apology. I sat there, watching him scroll through his phone, the light from the screen casting shadows across his face. It was a face I barely recognized anymore. The man who once held my hand tightly, who'd surprised me with little gifts and silly jokes, had drifted somewhere far away. The house felt emptier that night. The silence between us was louder than any argument could be. I found myself reaching back into memories. The early days when love was effortless, when we stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, when his laughter filled the rooms like sunlight. I wondered when that had changed. When had the man who once told me I was his world become someone who barely noticed the milestones we'd built together? Was it me? Had I stopped being enough? Or was it just time, the slow erosion that no one talks about? There was no anger, not yet, just a quiet ache, a sadness that settled deep in my chest. I felt like I was mourning something I hadn't fully lost, a love that was fading, slipping away without fanfare or fight. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I whispered a wish to the darkness, for clarity, for answers, for a way back to the man I married, or for the strength to let go if that path was closed forever. The house was silent, but inside, my heart was anything but. And somewhere between hope and despair, I realized that this forgotten anniversary was more than a missed date. It was the first crack in the foundation of everything I thought we had. Late at night, when the world outside was silent and the house should have been wrapped in calm, I found myself wide awake. The kind of awake where your mind races and every creak and whisper seems louder than it really is. I lay there, heart pounding softly, straining to hear something. Anything, beyond the usual hum of the night. And then I heard it. Footsteps. quiet but deliberate, moving softly down the hallway. I froze, breath caught in my throat, listening as the sound drifted past our bedroom door. It wasn't the usual shuffle of someone settling in for the night. It was different. Careful. Calculated. Then came the whispers. Low voices, clipped and urgent, barely audible but unmistakable. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone, the tension, it spoke volumes. A secret conversation. One that wasn't meant for me. I lay there, caught between the need to confront and the paralyzing fear of what I might discover. Part of me wanted to stay silent, to pretend I hadn't heard, to convince myself it was nothing. But another part, the part that had been quietly building suspicion for weeks, knew better. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every time the voices stopped, I held my breath, waiting for the next sound, the next revelation. The darkness around me seemed heavier, pressing in, filling the room with a weight that settled deep in my bones. I thought about reaching out, about calling his name, but my voice felt useless, swallowed by the thick silence. How do you ask questions when you already fear the answers? How do you demand truth when all you feel is a slow unraveling inside? In those long moments, I felt so small and so alone. The man who once held me close and whispered promises in the dark was now a stranger, speaking in hushed tones to someone else, hidden just out of reach. The home we built felt like a fragile shell, beautiful on the outside but cracked and empty within. Still, I waited. Not because I hoped for peace, but because I was afraid of what would come if I didn't. Afraid that confronting the truth too soon would shatter what little remained of us. As the voices faded and footsteps retreated, I lay awake until dawn, wrestling with a storm of emotions. Betrayal, fear, confusion, and a deep, aching sadness. There was no scream, no sudden breaking point, just the quiet, unbearable weight of knowing that some secrets could no longer be hidden. And in the stillness of that night, I understood that the road ahead would be harder than I ever imagined. But there was no turning back now. The silence had spoken, and I was listening. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind that slips by unnoticed, sunlight filtering through the curtains, the hum of distant traffic, the quiet rhythm of a house settling into its routine. But that day, everything changed. I found it purely by accident. A plain, unremarkable envelope tucked away between the pages of a book on the shelf. At first, I thought it was just some forgotten mail, maybe a bill or a note, but the way it felt, heavy, deliberate, stirred something uneasy inside me. I hesitated before picking it up, my fingers trembling slightly as I slid it free from its hiding place. The paper was thick, expensive-looking, sealed carefully. I didn't want to open it. Part of me begged to leave it alone, to preserve the fragile bubble of denial I'd been floating in. But curiosity, or maybe a deeper, darker need for truth, pushed me forward. Slowly, almost reverently, I broke the seal. Inside there were photos, candid shots of him, my husband, but not the man I thought I knew. These images showed him in moments that didn't belong to our marriage. Meetings in cafes with a woman whose smile was too intimate, secretive touches exchanged in dimly lit rooms, whispered conversations caught mid-laughter. There were receipts too, dinner bills from places neither of us had ever mentioned, hotel keycards with dates that matched his supposed business trips. My heart hammered wildly as I sifted through the evidence, a storm of emotions crashing over me. Shock, betrayal, anger. But beneath it all there was something else, a flicker of cold, steely resolve. I remembered the nights when he came home late, the vague excuses, the flicker of guilt in his eyes that he tried to hide. All the moments I'd brushed off as stress or fatigue suddenly snapped into place, forming a picture I couldn't ignore. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shatter the quiet lies we'd been living, but fear held me back. fear of what I might lose, fear of facing the emptiness that truth would bring. So instead, I folded the photos carefully and slid them back into the envelope, sealing my heart as tightly as I'd sealed the paper. That envelope became a silent witness to my unraveling world, a secret I carried with me, weighing heavier with each passing day. I found myself walking a thin line between hope and despair, caught in a dance of denial and acceptance. But as much as it scared me, I knew I couldn't run forever. That envelope was a reckoning, a challenge to face the darkness lurking beneath the surface of our life together. And deep down, I realized that my next steps would define everything. Would I crumble beneath the weight of betrayal, or would I rise, stronger, wiser, and ready to fight for the life I deserved? The choice was mine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I thought was lost: control. Denial is a curious thing. It's that fragile space where hope and fear collide, where you convince yourself that what you want to believe is the truth, even when the evidence stares you in the face. I found myself caught in that space more times than I can count. Every morning, I'd wake up telling myself, maybe it's just stress. Maybe I'm reading too much into things. I became an expert at rewriting reality, a mental magician, pulling illusions out of thin air to make the unbearable seem possible. When he stayed late at work, I told myself it was the big project, the deadline, the endless emails. When I heard the hushed phone calls, I imagined it was a surprise he was planning, something nice, something for us. Sometimes I caught myself smiling at the thought, me, the naive optimist, believing that love could fix anything, that time could smooth every rough edge. I laughed quietly in those moments, not at the situation, but at my own stubbornness. How did I get here? I wondered. How did I become the woman who ignores the signs? There were nights when I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my own self-deception. The silence in our home wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. I'd think about the envelope I found, the photos, the messages I couldn't unsee. Yet still, part of me clung to the hope that there was a reasonable explanation, that the man I loved wasn't capable of such betrayal. I imagined conversations where he'd explain everything, a misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment, something fixable. I rehearsed my words, trying to prepare for a confrontation that might never come, and every time I'd soften my heart just a little more, ready to forgive, to rebuild, to believe. But denial is exhausting. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The more you grasp, the more it slips away. I found myself walking a tightrope between holding on and letting go, afraid to face the truth but terrified of losing the illusion that kept me sane. Sometimes I wondered if denial was my way of protecting myself from the pain I wasn't ready to feel. It was easier to pretend that our marriage was intact than to admit it was breaking apart. Looking back, I realized that denial wasn't just about ignoring the facts. It was about preserving the parts of me that still believed in us, in what we were supposed to be. And maybe, in its strange way, denial was a necessary step, a bridge between heartbreak and acceptance. So I held onto that fragile hope a little longer, even as the cracks in our life grew deeper. Because sometimes the hardest thing to face isn't the truth, it's what comes after. I didn't plan the conversation. It just happened. One of those evenings when the weight of everything finally grew too heavy to carry in silence. He was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone like always, the soft glow of the screen lighting his face, casting shadows that made him seem even farther away. I stood there for a long moment watching him, trying to remember the last time we'd had a real conversation. Not the usual polite exchanges. Did you pay the bill? Or, what's for dinner? But something real, something honest. Can we talk? I said it quietly, but my voice must have startled him. He looked up, eyes slightly wide like he wasn't expecting me to speak, or maybe hoping I wouldn't. Of course, he said, placing the phone face down. That small gesture alone made my stomach twist. I sat across from him, the table suddenly feeling like a battleground. I didn't come armed with accusations. I didn't even raise my voice. I just looked at him, really looked, and asked the question that had been eating me alive. Is there someone else? The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was suffocating. His eyes flicked away for a moment, then back to mine. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The pause said more than any answer ever could. No, he finally said. There's no one else. You're imagining things. It wasn't just the words. It was how they landed. Flat, practiced, empty. I nodded slowly, but something inside me cracked. Then why do I feel like I'm living with a ghost? Why does your phone never leave your hand? Why don't you look at me anymore like I'm still your wife and not a roommate? He rubbed his face, sighed, mumbled something about stress and work, how things had been hard lately, that he didn't want me to worry. But I was already worried. I was way past that. I just want the truth, I whispered. Even if it hurts. I'd rather face it than keep pretending nothing's wrong. He reached for my hand across the table, and for a second I almost let him touch me. But I pulled back, not out of anger, out of self-preservation. He didn't confess that night. He didn't tell me about her. He didn't admit what I already knew. And maybe that hurt more than the truth ever could have, that he still chose to lie even when I gave him a way out. I went to bed alone that night, and for the first time, I stopped hoping for the man I used to know, because hope without honesty is just another form of heartbreak. Something shifted in me after that night, not dramatically. There was no slamming of doors, no shouting, no ultimatums, just a quiet turn inward. A decision made, not with fire, but with frost. I realized I couldn't keep asking for the truth from someone who'd already decided not to give it. So I stopped asking, and I started watching. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't rage, it was clarity. Cold, clean, sharp. I wanted facts, not feelings. Proof, not promises. I needed something solid to hold on to because my reality had started to feel like quicksand. And if I was going to lose everything, I wanted to know exactly what I was losing and why. I started small, watching the way he moved through the house, when he checked his phone, how quickly he shut down apps when I walked into the room. I noticed patterns, regular absences disguised as meetings, unexplained charges on our joint card, cologne I didn't recognize lingering on his coat. I wrote it all down. Not like a detective, more like a woman building a map out of her own confusion. It helped. There was something strangely empowering about paying attention, about using observation instead of emotion. It made me feel not strong exactly, but steady, and yet every new discovery chipped away at something soft inside me. Each note I made, each detail I logged was another little death, another nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. There were moments, quiet, breathless moments, when I hated myself for doing it. For sneaking glances at his screen when he was in the shower, for pretending to sleep while I listened to his whispers behind closed doors. It made me feel small, petty. But then I'd remind myself, I didn't choose this. I didn't break us. I was just finally looking at what had been broken all along. It's strange how strength feels when it comes from survival. It's not loud. It's not even visible. It's the quiet moment when you decide to stop pleading and start preparing. Some days I felt powerful, like I was reclaiming a part of myself that had been asleep. Other days I felt like a hollow version of the woman I used to be. But even on the worst days, I kept going. Because knowing, really knowing, gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, not exactly. But I knew this much. I wouldn't ask again. I wouldn't beg. And I wouldn't break. Not quietly anyway. It happened just after midnight. He'd fallen asleep on the couch. Work papers scattered across the coffee table, phone resting loosely in his hand. I stood there for a long moment, watching his chest rise and fall, listening to the soft rhythm of his breath, and trying to remember when I'd last felt close to him. I didn't plan to do it. I swear I didn't. But something inside me, that quiet, worn-out voice that had been whispering for weeks, pushed me forward. I took the phone gently, careful not to wake him. My hands shook as I unlocked it, though I already knew I'd find something. You don't start digging unless the ground's already soft beneath your feet. The messages were there, waiting. Her name wasn't saved under anything suspicious, just initials. Innocent enough. But the thread told a different story. Pages of private jokes, emojis, nicknames I'd never heard before. I miss you already. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Each word felt like a crack across my skin, sharp, small, but deep. There were photos too. Selfies from hotel rooms, a blurry shot of their dinner, a glimpse of her hand holding his across a table I didn't recognize. I kept scrolling, even though part of me begged to stop. Every message peeled back another layer of the man I thought I knew. The man who'd kissed me goodnight while texting her. Can't wait to see you again. My heart wasn't racing. It was something colder than panic, slower. Like frost spreading across glass, freezing everything in its path. I don't remember how long I stood there reading. Time seemed to stretch and collapse in on itself. I was floating above it all, watching my life split in two, the before and the after. Eventually I put the phone back in his hand, gently as if he was still someone I loved, and then I walked to the bathroom, locked the door and just sat. Not crying, not screaming, just sitting. Because betrayal doesn't always hit like thunder. Sometimes it's a quiet thing, a whisper behind your back, a phone screen glowing in the dark, a message not meant for you. I stared at my reflection and saw a woman I barely recognized. Tired, hollow-eyed, but something else too. Something just beginning to wake up. I had the truth now. Not suspicions, not guesses. Proof. And there's a strange kind of power in that, even when it breaks your heart. I didn't plan to see her. I wasn't stalking. I wasn't plotting. I was just living my day, doing something as ordinary as picking up coffee. But there she was, standing at the counter, ordering something sweet, smiling softly into her phone. I knew it was her the second I saw her. I'd seen her face before, not in person, but in the photos he didn't think I'd ever see. The curve of her cheek, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the same casual, practiced move I'd once thought was mine alone. She didn't notice me at first. Why would she? I was just another woman in line, just another shadow in her perfectly lit day. And I could have left. I could have turned around and walked away. But instead, I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. She looked up, polite, distracted, her eyes searching mine for context she didn't yet have. "I think you know my husband," I said. Her face changed slowly, surprise, confusion, and then a flash of recognition. She didn't deny it, didn't fake ignorance. She just froze, like time had caught up with her in that exact moment. We stood there in the middle of the coffee shop, two women bound by a man who'd lied to both of us in different ways. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't cause a scene. "I'm not here to attack you," I said. I need to understand." She swallowed hard, her hand tightening around her phone. "I didn't know he was married at first, and when I found out, he said it was over. That you two were basically done." Of course he did. It was a line I'd heard before from stories other women told, never imagining I'd be living one. I studied her. Not her beauty, not her clothes, but her eyes. There was something in them I recognized. Guilt, embarrassment, maybe even a little shame. And maybe, just maybe, the same kind of loneliness I'd been feeling for months. She wasn't some cartoon villain. She was just a woman who wanted to be loved, and who believed the lies that made that feel possible. I don't hate you, I said quietly, but I do pity you, because if he could do this to me, he'll do it to you too. I turned and walked away before she could respond, because I wasn't there for her. I was there for me, to see it, to face it, and to walk out of that moment with my head held high, not because I won, but because I didn't let it break me. I waited until the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that almost feels sacred. No television, no clinking dishes, no excuses. Just him, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and a look in his eyes that told me he knew something was coming. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the phone or the photos or the lies. I just sat down across from him and looked at the man I'd shared a bed with for over a decade. "We need to talk," I said. His shoulders tensed. He tried to meet my gaze but couldn't hold it. That alone spoke volumes. "I saw the messages," I continued. "I saw the pictures, the dinners, the hotel rooms. I know." He didn't speak right away. I could see the war behind his eyes. Denial, justification, panic, maybe all of it tangled in the silence. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said finally, voice low. I almost laughed, not bitterly, just quietly. "There's no good way to find out your husband's in love with someone else." "I'm not in love with her," he said quickly. Too quickly. I tilted my head. "Then what is it? A distraction? A hobby? Something to make you feel younger while I handle the laundry and grocery lists and keep our lives from falling apart?" He flinched at that, but I didn't stop. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I needed to say it. For once. Out loud. "I gave you every chance to tell me the truth," I said. "I begged you with my silence. I waited for you to be honest. You chose to lie instead." He tried to explain, said it was complicated, said it wasn't about me. But everything he said felt like a shadow of what I needed. No apology, no real regret. Just excuses dressed up as insight. "I'm not here to fix this," I said, my voice steady. "Not anymore. I'm here to say I see you. The version of you I didn't want to believe existed, and I'm done pretending I don't." His eyes watered. Mine didn't. I stood up slowly, not because I was finished feeling, sir, but because I was finished hiding from it. "I don't hate you," I added, pausing at the doorway, "but I do love myself enough to stop letting you hurt me." And just like that, the silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was final. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who sat across from a divorce lawyer. It always seemed like something that happened to other people. Strangers, distant friends, headlines. Not me. Not us. But there I was, sitting in a polished office that smelled faintly of leather and coffee, listening to a woman named Patricia explain how marital assets were divided, how fault-based proceedings worked in our state, how custody, if there had been children, would be negotiated like property. She was sharp, calm, efficient, the kind of woman who didn't flinch at the word betrayal because she'd heard it 1,000 times in 1,000 voices. And still, she spoke to me gently, like she understood that this wasn't just about paperwork. It was about dismantling a life. I tried to keep my composure, nodding as she talked about joint accounts, retirement funds, the value of our home, and how infidelity, if proven, could impact the financial settlement. I didn't ask many questions, not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't stop thinking. How did we end up here? I remembered the day we bought that house, how we celebrated with takeout and cheap champagne on the living room floor. I remembered opening a joint savings account together, like we were building something sacred. I remembered believing in forever. Patricia slid a form across the desk. "This is just intake," she said. "To get a better sense of where things stand." I looked down at the blank spaces waiting to be filled. Date of marriage, grounds for divorce, assets, debts, irreconcilable differences. That last one stung more than it should have. I think she saw something in my face then, some flicker of grief I hadn't meant to show. She leaned forward, softened her voice. "You don't have to make every decision today," she said, "but you are allowed to protect yourself, and you don't have to feel guilty for that." It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like I wasn't just a client. Like I was a woman reclaiming something I didn't even realize I'd lost. I signed the form, not because I wanted to end my marriage that day, but because I wanted to end the part of me that believed I had to keep suffering to prove I was loyal. When I left the office, the sky had started to darken. The air was crisp. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was breathing for myself. This wasn't revenge. This was survival. This was step one. It's funny how quickly you can go from doubting yourself to building a case like your heart depends on it. I never imagined I'd be the kind of woman organizing folders full of screenshots, receipts, statements, timelines. But here I was, calm, methodical, and more focused than I'd been in years. There was something strangely empowering about it. Not vindictive, not bitter, just clear. Every detail I gathered wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about having the facts when the time came. Facts that couldn't be gaslit, spun, or swept under the rug. I started with the credit card statements, highlighting charges at restaurants we'd never been to, hotel bookings during the same weeks he'd claimed business travel. Then came the phone records, call durations that stretched into the early hours, numbers saved under initials, consistent patterns that told their own story. I kept everything organized in a locked drawer. Digital copies in a password-protected folder, printed pages in neat stacks. It was the least romantic scrapbook I'd ever created, but somehow the most important. There were moments when I'd pause, fingers resting on the edge of a receipt, and think, this used to be my life. This used to be my love story. But those moments didn't break me. Not anymore. If anything, they sharpened my resolve. Because with every page, I was reclaiming something. My time, my voice, my dignity. I hired a forensic accountant. A recommendation from Patricia. He was quiet, almost clinical, and didn't blink once while explaining how to trace marital funds used during an affair. This isn't about punishment, he said. It's about fairness. And that word, fairness, felt like an anchor in a storm. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was trying to protect myself, to draw a line between what had been taken from me and what I was willing to surrender. I even kept a journal, not for the court, for myself. A place to pour out the things I couldn't say out loud, the anger, the disbelief, the strange flickers of peace that came with every step forward. Some nights I cried, not from weakness, from release, letting go of the woman who begged for honesty, making space for the woman who demanded it. When I looked at the pile of evidence I'd gathered, I didn't see betrayal anymore. I saw proof that I was awake, aware, prepared. This wasn't a battle I wanted, but it was one I refused to lose. Money was never something I liked talking about. It felt cold, distant, like numbers could never fully explain what they were tied to, the memories, the effort, the sacrifices. But in divorce, money becomes its own language. And suddenly, every dollar matters. Every account tells a story. Every missing transaction becomes a question mark that echoes louder than any argument. We'd spent years building our life. Shared accounts, mutual investments, the house, the cars, the retirement plans, all of it built on the assumption of forever. And now I had to untangle it, line by line. I sat with Patricia, spreadsheet open, heart in my throat. She walked me through it gently but directly. This is what's joint. This is what's yours. This is what we're going to challenge. Challenge. The word felt strange at first. I wasn't a fighter. Not really. But I was learning. There were expenses I'd never noticed before. Dinners, hotel stays, gift purchases that had slipped past me because I trusted him. Charges that now lit up in bright red on a financial statement. Not because of the money, but because of what they meant. "This," Patricia said, tapping one line with her pen, "this is a luxury watch store. He bought something expensive 2 weeks before your anniversary. And never gave it to you, correct?" I nodded. "Then who did he give it to?" That question hit harder than I expected. I wasn't just tracing spending, I was tracing betrayal in dollars, cents, and silence. We began reallocating. I moved my direct deposits into a new account, froze our joint credit cards, listed out all marital assets and flagged anything that smelled like a lie. Patricia brought in a property evaluator, a tax consultant, even a financial mediator. And through all of it, I kept thinking, this isn't about greed. It's about respect. It's about not letting someone walk away with everything while I'm left rebuilding from zero. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, lost in a sea of numbers, legal terms, and paperwork. But there was something else too, a steady fire building inside me. I wasn't just surviving this process, I was owning it. I started showing up to meetings prepared, highlighted documents, questions written in the margins, voice steady. I was no longer the woman crying in the bathroom. I was the woman making sure every asset was accounted for. Because when someone breaks your trust, the least they can do is not steal your future too. And I was going to make damn sure of that. The legal side of divorce was hard, cold, calculated, mechanical. But the emotional side, that was war. Not the loud, violent kind. No, this was quieter, crueler. A war fought with silence, half smiles, and carefully timed comments that hit just below the surface. He started acting like he was the one being wronged, like I'd betrayed him by refusing to keep pretending. He'd walk into the room and sigh loud enough for me to hear it. He'd mutter things under his breath, just loud enough. It didn't have to be like this. Or, you used to be kinder. As if kindness was owed to the man who'd unraveled my life behind my back. Sometimes he'd try to play the victim. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said one night. "You shut me out long before this happened." I stared at him across the kitchen island, blinking back the heat rising behind my eyes. "I shut you out," I said, "while you were busy letting someone else in?" He didn't respond, just turned away like that ended the conversation. I started to learn how to breathe through those moments, how to let his manipulations pass through me without landing. But it took effort. Some days I failed, some days I yelled, some nights I cried into a pillow wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. That's when my sister started calling every day. Just 5 minutes, sometimes 10. Not to rehash everything, just to remind me I wasn't alone. She never said, "I told you so." Never judged. Just asked, "How's your heart today?" In a way that made me feel seen. Friends I hadn't heard from in years reached out to. Quiet check-ins, little lifelines. One even brought over wine and cookies, sat on my couch while I broke down for the first time in weeks. She didn't tell me to move on. She just sat there and let me feel it. It was strange. The man I thought would be my greatest comfort had become my battlefield, and the people I hadn't leaned on in years became my armor. Every cruel comment, every attempt to twist the narrative made me stronger. Not immediately, but slowly. I started recognizing gaslighting when I heard it. I stopped explaining myself. I let him carry the weight of his own choices, and I carried mine with grace even when it hurt like hell. Because emotional warfare doesn't just reveal who someone else is. It reveals who you are when you finally stop apologizing for surviving. The envelope arrived on a rainy Tuesday, thick, cream-coloured, with my name printed in perfect professional lettering. No return address, but I knew who it was from, or rather what it was. The settlement offer. I held it in my hands for a long time before opening it. Strange how a few pieces of paper could hold so much weight. Not just legal terms and asset breakdowns, but everything we had built, divided, and priced out like a ledger. Years of love turned into numbers. I sat at the kitchen table. Our kitchen, staring at the first page. His lawyer had made it neat, almost polite. Language like amicable division and reasonable request jumped off the page like little betrayals. He was offering me the house, but wanted to keep his retirement untouched. He wanted to split the investments, but not the travel points. And buried in the fine print was a clause that made me laugh out loud. A paragraph asking that we keep the details of the separation private and dignified. Dignified. As if his affair had been discreet. As if my silence had been easy. As if all of this could be cleaned up with a few careful signatures and a check written in clean ink. I felt two things at once, rage and something that surprised me more, doubt. Was this it? Was I ready to make it real? Patricia called as I was halfway through the document. Take your time, she said, but don't let guilt negotiate for you. That line stayed with me. Guilt had been whispering in my ear for months, telling me to be the bigger person, to walk away with grace, to not make things messier than they already were. But grace without boundaries isn't strength. It's surrender. And I'd surrendered enough already. I read every page again, this time not as a woman grieving, but as a woman protecting what's hers. I circled the inconsistencies, made notes in the margins. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for fairness, for acknowledgement, for something that felt like justice. There were no good choices here, just hard ones. But I'd already made the hardest one when I chose myself over the illusion of a marriage that no longer existed. I slid the folder back into the envelope and sealed it. Not with peace, not with bitterness, but with resolve. He wanted closure. I wanted dignity. We were both about to get exactly what we earned. I used to second-guess everything. Every decision, every word, every feeling. I made myself small for the sake of peace, bit my tongue to avoid tension, let him lead even when my gut told me something was wrong. That was before. Now I stood taller, not because I was fearless, but because I was done shrinking. The first time I refused one of his terms, he looked genuinely confused, as if he expected me to fold, like I always had. You're being unreasonable, he said, his voice cold, controlled. You're letting your emotions cloud judgment. I smiled, not because it was funny, because it was predictable. I'm not emotional, I replied calmly. I'm clear. He blinked like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Maybe this version of me, the one who spoke without trembling, who sat in meetings and countered offers without blinking, was a stranger to him. But she wasn't new. She'd just been buried under years of compromise. I thought about all the women I'd watched over the years. Friends, colleagues, even my own mother, who gave up too much in the name of keeping things civil. Women who let themselves be talked out of what they were owed because someone told them they were too angry, too dramatic, too much. Not me. Not anymore. I started trusting my instincts. When something didn't sit right, I said so. When Patricia asked if I wanted to push for spousal support, I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said, because I built this life too. And I'm not walking away from it empty-handed while he starts over with someone else. Was it uncomfortable? Yes. Did it feel unnatural at first to demand what I deserved? Absolutely. But every time I stood my ground, I felt that flicker inside me, strength returning in small, steady waves. He tried to guilt me. I thought you were better than this, he muttered after one of our lawyer meetings. I looked at him, calm as ever. I am better, I said. Better than lying. Better than pretending. Better than disappearing while someone else writes the ending to my story. Standing my ground wasn't about punishing him. It was about honoring myself. It was about reclaiming all the parts of me I'd handed over one compromise at a time. And if that made me too much, too firm, too loud, too demanding, then finally, I was exactly enough. I never imagined myself sitting in a courtroom, Not as a juror, not as a witness, and certainly not as a woman fighting for the life she helped build. But there I was, on a cold morning that smelled like nerves and stale coffee, dressed in the quiet armour of someone who's been through hell and come out the other side. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Sterile. Echoey. It didn't feel like a place where something so personal should unfold. But that was the thing about divorce. It turns everything intimate into procedure, pain into paperwork, promises into exhibits. He was already there when I walked in, seated beside his lawyer, flipping through documents like he was reviewing a business deal. No emotion, just strategy. I didn't look away, I didn't flinch. Patricia leaned over and whispered, "You're doing great. Just breathe." But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had my truth. I had my facts. I had my voice. When they asked me to speak, I stood slowly, smoothed my skirt, and walked to the witness stand. My heart beat hard in my chest, but my voice was steady. I didn't raise it. I didn't shake. I just told the truth. I talked about our marriage, the good years, the slow unraveling, the silence that grew between us like ivy choking a house. I spoke of the late nights, the secrets, the lies that fell into place like puzzle pieces I never asked to solve. And I spoke about the hurt. Not in dramatic flourishes, but plainly. The kind of honesty that stings more because it's calm, measured, real. His lawyer tried to shift the narrative, asked about my emotions, my reactions, whether I'd made things worse by digging, by escalating. I looked him in the eye and said, "Wanting the truth is not escalation. Protecting myself is not aggression." A silence followed, thick, undeniable. The judge didn't speak much, just nodded occasionally, asked a few questions, but something in his face told me he saw it. He saw me. I walked out of that courtroom not knowing exactly what the ruling would be, but I didn't need to, because I'd shown up, fully, honestly, without shame. And no matter what the papers said, I had already won something far more valuable, my dignity, my peace, and the quiet knowing that I had faced the fire, and never once looked away. The first morning I woke up alone in my new place, I expected to feel empty. I expected the silence to press in on me, to remind me of everything I'd lost. But instead, it felt like breathing clean air after being underwater too long. The apartment was small, modest really, but it was mine. Every lamp, every pillow, every coffee cup was chosen by me, for me. No compromise, no discussion, just what I liked. That alone felt revolutionary. I started rediscovering things I'd forgotten I loved. Music in the mornings, walking barefoot across the kitchen floor with the sun warming my toes, drinking coffee without rush or routine, just sipping slowly while watching the world outside my window begin again. There were little victories every day. Hanging a painting without asking for input, setting up my bookshelf exactly the way I wanted. Cooking dinner for one, and actually enjoying it. These small, ordinary things started to feel extraordinary. I even laughed again. Real laughter. Not polite or performative, but the kind that sneaks up on you and fills a room. A friend told me a ridiculous story over wine one night, and I laughed until my sides hurt. And when I caught myself in the mirror afterward, cheeks flushed and eyes crinkled, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked free. I wasn't pretending anymore. I didn't have to read between the lines of someone else's silence or search for answers that were never coming. I was no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop, because I had taken off the whole damn pair and walked away. Sure, there were still hard days, days when I missed the idea of what we'd had, days when a song or a scent would tug at an old memory, but those moments passed and they hurt less each time. And slowly, something else grew in their place. Excitement. Not the wild, dizzying kind, but the quiet thrill of possibility, of new plans, new people, new peace. I signed up for a pottery class. joined a book club, took myself out to dinner just because, for the first time in years, I wasn't managing someone else's expectations. I was meeting my own. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting the pain, not pretending it didn't happen, but choosing, every day, to live beyond it. One breath, one choice, one step forward. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new book, and I was finally the one holding the pen. If you'd asked me a year ago where I'd be now, I never would have imagined this. I wouldn't have believed you if you'd told me I'd walk away from a marriage I once fought so hard to save. That I'd stand in a courtroom and speak my truth. That I'd find peace in solitude and strength in silence. But here I am, and I'm not broken. There's this myth that women who walk away from betrayal come out bitter, angry, hardened, but that's not what I became. I didn't let it ruin me. I let it reveal me. The truth is, sometimes the fire we fear the most is the very thing that purifies us, strips away the illusions, burns off everything false, and forces us to start again, raw, vulnerable, real. And in that fire, I found myself. Not the version I had carefully shaped to fit someone else's expectations, not the woman who kept the peace, smoothed over tension, stayed quiet to keep love intact. No. I found the woman beneath her. The one who speaks clearly, who chooses herself, the one who survived the storm, and decided to stop apologizing for the space she takes up. Pain changed me, but it didn't destroy me. It taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean returning, that letting go is not the same as losing. That love, real love, starts with the way we treat ourselves when no one else is watching. I've learned to value my own company, to listen to my instincts, to see red flags not as puzzles to solve, but as signs to walk away sooner. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not dramatic declarations or perfect closure, but quiet mornings where your chest feels lighter. Moments where you laugh without guilt. Nights when your past doesn't haunt you and your future doesn't scare you. I don't need to be angry anymore. I don't need revenge or validation or some cinematic ending. I just need the truth. And now, I have it. I am not what he did to me. I am what I chose to become after. And if someone else is listening, someone who's still in the thick of it, still doubting, still afraid to leave, let me say this. You are not crazy. You are not too emotional. You are not asking for too much. You are asking to be seen, heard, respected. And that is the bare minimum. And if the person you're with can't give it to you, you are allowed to walk away and rebuild everything from the ashes, stronger than ever before. What part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. If this story felt close to your heart, give it a like, subscribe if you want to be part of a space where real stories matter. Got a couple more minutes? Check out the next story. It's also about the things we rarely say out loud.